A Texas family was forced to spend Christmas without their father after he was shot and killed doing his job. Cesar Montalongo was the head of maintenance at an apartment complex in Grand Prairie, Texas. On Christmas Eve, he was on call and came by the complex to check on the pipes, since several had burst because of the freezing temperatures. Now, he was on an apartment balcony, and the tenant reportedly thought that Montalongo was trying to break in, and police say the tenant shot Montalongo through the window. He was rushed to the hospital, but eventually died. The tenant stayed at the scene and cooperated with police, but the medical examiner did rule the death as a homicide. It's now going to be up to a grand jury to decide if the shooter will face any charges. Montalongo's oldest son, Cesar Jr., told a local news station, quote, "We do forgive the person for what they did, and we pray that the Lord forgives the person for what they did. However, justice is justice and fair is fair, and whatever that looks like, it's going to be up to the Lord and the grand jury." So, Terry, really sad case. The victim's son already forgiven the shooter, but what are your thoughts on that? And by the way, could that impact the grand jury's decision, that statement?
Well, I think it's unusual to do it so soon, and yes, I do think it could impact the grand jury and their ultimate decision. Look, I think that when families do forgive the shooter or the alleged shooter or someone who has killed their family member, obviously it helps them to get over the situation and it lifts a burden. And it does sound like this family is very religious, and that probably helps them as far as getting over this real hard tragedy. But you know, when you see victim impact statements, those too can affect what a jury does at the end of the day and how the sentencing goes at the end of the day. And many times we've seen these victim impact statements where they do say they forgive the individuals. So I do think it has an impact both with the grand jury, at the trial, during sentencing, and I think at the end of the day, it helps the individual to get over what's going on. But you have to be careful about that, Jesse.
And just focusing on the law, the grand jury, isn't it all about, Brian, whether the shooter's actions were reasonable?
Yeah, so if the grand jury is hearing these charges, one of the major things that any defense attorney is going to ask is presented to the grand jury is the concept of the castle doctrine or self-defense. This person is purportedly defending themselves from what they believe to be a burglar. Now, the question is, what was he wearing at the time? Did he have like a uniform on that would have said that he was a maintenance worker? Was he well known to the community? It seems like this was an apartment complex. But did this person live in the apartment complex? Were they guests of the apartment complex? All of this information and these facts, they say the balcony. We're talking a first floor balcony where you can just walk up, a fifth floor balcony. Again, all of these facts are going to add to the cauldron of whether or not this was reasonable. And I think that's what's going to come down to the decision as to whether or not he gets indicted or not.
Yeah, very detail specific in these kinds of questions, in these kinds of cases. Just absolutely tragic when you see him with his family. Yoga students in Mexico reported their teacher missing last week after he disappeared on a dog walk, only to find out that he lived a shocking double life. Yogis knew him as Leon Ferrara, but his real name is Jorge Rueda Landeros. He is a fugitive wanted by the FBI. The 52-year-old is the prime suspect in the 2010 murder of Professor Sue Ann Markham. This is a woman that Landeros had a relationship with. Markham was killed at her home in Maryland, and law enforcement first looked into a man that stole her vehicle, but they eventually cleared him as a suspect. They then turned to Landeros after discovering forensic evidence tying him to the crime scene. Landeros, who has dual citizenship in the United States and Mexico, fled to Guadalajara and changed his identity. But 12 years later, he now awaits deportation to the United States for trial. The question is, how exactly do you spot a fugitive on the run? Well, we spoke with former FBI agent Bobby Chacon to find out what patterns the agency looks for.
It's very rare that someone goes to a place that they have no familiarity with, that they don't speak the language. Of course, that's probably one of the best places to go. But, you know, because when you're staying on the run, you're always looking over your shoulder. And so you kind of can stand out a little bit if you're not from that area, or if you have no connection to it, you've never been there before. So you start looking at places that they've been or wanted to go to, or have some familiarity on some level with. And that kind of is the first way you narrow down geographically where they might be. My assumption is somebody recognized him from some of the publicity of him being on the top 10. I would imagine that's one of the ways. And it's interesting because we had a recent case with a fugitive that was posing as a yoga instructor down in Costa Rica. If you remember the case where one woman killed another woman who had, supposedly a love triangle with a professional cyclist, I think they were, and then she ran down and became a yoga instructor in Costa Rica. She wasn't from Costa Rica, of course, but they got on her. So this is like the second fugitive in the last couple of months that I recall that was acting as a yoga instructor.
Now, Brian, we have to be clear here that Landeros is innocent until proven guilty, but when you and I spoke, you said there were two facts that you thought sounded pretty bad for his case, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at this case and I'm seeing two things. One, the DNA under the fingernails. There are reports that his DNA is under the victim's fingernails and she was found at the bottom of the stairs. That looks like a struggle. That looks like a fight to me. And while it seems unclear what the relationship was, one thing does stick out, that being the second point, is a $500,000 life insurance policy where he was the beneficiary in the name. Oftentimes, it's either love or money that is the motivation to murder, but if he left and didn't collect, that kind of raises some eyebrows. But like you said, it's innocent. I like to say unless proven guilty, but that's just the defense attorney in me.
Yeah, well, I could kind of see, you were actually talking more like a prosecutor there. You're building the case against him at an upcoming trial. Now, Terry, talking about the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, I understand there's only one woman on the list, right? What can you tell us about her?
It's very unusual that a woman would be put onto the list, but there is one, and guess what? It's not for murder. Her name is Ruja Ignatova. She's from Bulgaria. She's 42 years old. Quite attractive woman, actually. And she was put on that list in June of 2022, so quite recently. You will never guess why she's on the list. It's for fraud, wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering for cryptocurrency. So she's in the same boat as we've seen for, Sam Bankman-Fried, but she actually tried to escape the authorities, so that's why she's on that list. And she actually had $4 billion worth of money that she took from millions of these people who invested. And actually, she is very similar to Bankman-Fried, and they don't have their hands on her just yet.
Yeah, she didn't have a $250 million bail. Is how it's going. Terry, Brian, thanks so much. Everyone, thanks for joining us here on The Daily. We're going to see you next time as we discuss justice in America.